Welcome to an Orinoco Tribune special interview on Guyana with Gerald Perreira. So we know the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, a small Caribbean country that gained independence from Britain, I would say quite recently, only in 1966, appears to be transforming into a US military outpost in Latin America and the Caribbean, administered by a government that seems to be willing to do the empire's bidding. And despite having a neoliberal economy that is plagued by inequality and corruption, Guyana has been the darling of the International Monetary Fund and other lending institutions that in recent times have continuously been predicting double digit GDP growth for the country every year. And during the same period, the Guyanese authorities have aligned themselves with Washington's interests and in the process endangering the security of the entire region. So to discuss the situation, the economic, the social, political, and geopolitical condition of Guyana, we have as guest today Gerald A. Pereira, who is a theologian, educator, and political activist. He has written on a wide range of topics, and his articles and essays can be found on international sites, including Modern Ghana, Internationalist 360, Black Agenda Report, Countercurrents, Just World, Pambasuka, and Monthly Review. He is the chairperson of the Organization for the Victory of the People, based in Guyana, and is an executive member of the Caribbean Pan African Network. He lived in the Libyan Jamahiriya for many years and was a founding member of the World Mataba. So, Gerald, thanks a lot for accepting the invitation. I'm sure it will be an interesting interview.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
We are
On.
thanks is on both sides. Okay,
Yeah.
so we will start with I'll just start with asking you to give us a brief overview of the political scenario in Guyana, especially focusing on what are the principal political parties, what their ideologies are, what they do in the country, etc., as well as the real powers, the de facto powers in the country.
You know, uh, only recently, a popular columnist wrote a piece commenting on the politics of yesteryear. And he was speaking about the times, that particular time at the university and in the society, there were debates, very philosophical, where we address issues. And of course, in those days, there was no internet, no mobile phone, but political activists and politicians and so were reading. And in the parliament, there were debates that were highly philosophical and so, and he was saying that he missed those days. And to put it in context, when you look, what he was saying is that when you look at what is taking place in Guyana today, you listen to the politicians, the mainstream politicians, and all the political parties. They speak and operate as though Guyana is the only country on planet Earth. These people do not have an understanding, a real understanding of what is happening at the global level and the way it impacts Guyanese society. So what we have is there's no politics of meaning. The politics is what we call a sort of a gutter politics, where people attack each other about what they own, uh, who is having an extramarital relationship and all of that type of thing. It's we call it a politics of cuss out. Good. There is nothing of substance in it when you listen to the politicians, and there is none of them possess any vision of what it is to build a new nation building. Politics and political activism is an area for people to enrich themselves. That is what it's about. And Guyana, we in the Organization for the Victory of the People, we see Guyana, this is how we describe Guyana. We describe Guyana as neo-plantation with the main actors, the major parties and all the political parties competing with each other to show the plantation master, which is imperialism, who is better at managing this new plantation. No one is committed, none of them are committed to a politics of transformation that will change the imbalance in power, the way power is concentrated. No one is committed to radically transforming the society where power and wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few. There's no. And all the political parties that have contested the elections, with the exception of the OVP, are happy to kneel before imperialism. They don't challenge imperialism. They do not. And none of them, all are committed to neoliberal economics. The only political formation that has defined itself ideologically is the Organization for the Victory of the People. We are unapologetically socialists. We're not Marxists, but we draw and we understand Marx and Lenin's contribution, but we're not Marxists. We're revolutionary socialists. We're anti-imperialists, because our socialism is ethically inspired too, because we see socialism more than just as an economic project. Our socialism is inspired by the revolutionary teachings of Jesus Christ, the liberation theology, by the true Islam, the liberatory Islam of Prophet Muhammad. And those are that's a revolutionary tradition that informs us. And we draw from all those great revolutionary leaders and thinkers who have made the contribution to human emancipation, including the great Hugo Chavez. In Guyana, all the political parties are committed to neoliberal economics, and that's where they are. Ideologically, they are pro-capitalist, and none of them, with the exception of maybe to a certain extent very lukewarm, the People's Progressive Party, the ruling party, got up at the UN and asked for Israel's withdrawal. But we do business with Israel. Israeli companies are in Guyana. And it is only Belize that broke relations completely with the racist and apartheid state of Israel. So all the political parties ideologically are into neoliberal economics. The People's Progressive Party, that was founded by Chedi Jagan, that was once Marxist-Leninist, at the last Congress not too long ago, removed all references to Marxism, Leninism, and socialism from their constitution. They finally did it. They were practicing neoliberal economics, but they had that there. And the reason for that is very opportunistic, because the People's Progressive Party they were good at deceiving a lot of communist and left-wing organizations outside. When they go to international forums and they meet with you, you get the impression that they're anti-imperialist and all of that. But at home, it's a different thing. And I think that was one of the shortcomings of what Lenin said, that a country's foreign policy is an extension of their domestic policy. Not necessarily. The PPP, when outside, might take some positions that seem progressive, but at home, they go along with imperialist dictates, and the Western powers openly interfere in our national affairs.
Yeah. And okay, so it's from here that we'll go into the next one, and that's of course also about politics. That is, Guyana got its independence from Britain, no less, in less than 60 years ago. I said 1966, and
Yeah.
at the time of independence, as you mentioned, there were strong Marxist, Leninist parties in national politics.
Mm.
Yet, what has happened since then in 58 years that the country now finds itself in a situation where all those former left parties, Marxist Leninist parties, uphold and apply neoliberalism?
Yeah, well, you know, as I mentioned, Chedi Jagan, the founder of the People's Progressive Party, long before Salvador Allende, he was the first self-proclaimed Marxist to win an election, and he served a number of years, 3 years, as a premier, and he was removed eventually by the British and the Americans. But there is was always a strong left-wing tradition in Guyana, even before Chedi Jagan. We had a People's Party that was committed to fighting the plantocracy and the colonial powers and so for reforms and so. And then when Chedi Jagan returned to Guyana, then later Forbes Burnham. And at one time, we had the right-wing forces were never really strong in Guyana. You had a right-wing party called the United Force, but it was small and drew most of its support from the Portuguese business class and the Amerindian communities that were influenced by the Catholic Church, because many indigenous people became Catholics. But we had at one time, in the 70s right up to the 80s, we had the three major political formations: the People's National Congress of Forbes Burnham, Chedi Jagan's People's Progressive Party, and the Working People's Alliance with Walter Rodney. Three powerful political parties that declared themselves Marxist Leninists and anti-imperialists. And I was one who was arguing for the three parties to come together and form a united socialist party of Guyana or so. Because the right wing was never strong, but there was a lot of fighting. And the WPA saw it at that time. Instead of seeing imperialism as the principal, as the main enemy, the WPA confronted the Burnham regime. And then Burnham died, and then his party moved to the right. And years after, the WPA that fought Burnham found it very convenient to form a political alliance with the People's National Congress Reform. They changed the name to People's National Congress Reform when the party had already gone in the direction of neoliberal economics. So all of these parties that were once Marxist Leninists moved to the right, more to the center right or what have you. And what also led to that is that after the collapse of what was referred to as actually existing socialism or the Soviet bloc, many political parties, not just in Guyana, the Caribbean, but afar, like places of Africa, they lost their bearings. So when the Soviet bloc collapsed, these parties abandoned Marxism, Leninism, and moved towards neoliberal economics. Because at that time you had this nonsense, this talk about Tina, there is no alternative, and people opted for what is called Reaganomics or Thatcherism, which is the Washington Consensus neoliberal economics. But people like myself, and there were others who said, no. What collapse is not the end of socialism. And the struggle for socialism, the real struggle for socialism begins. And at that time, you had the Koreans, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, brought out to document the Pyongyang Declaration, which a number of parties signed on to. And at that time, we were known as, we had a small group called the National Movement for True Independence. And we signed the declaration with many other parties and organizations supporting the struggle for socialism and socialism had not collapsed. So we did not allow what happened in the Soviet bloc to turn us against what constitutes socialism and the struggle for socialism. So all the parties today in Guyana, even the ones that were once on the left, have opted for neoliberal economics. And you've seen across the planet, wherever the neoliberal agenda has been implemented, it has just the gap between the have and the have-nots have widened. There is massive, you just have to look at the unemployment, the crisis of capitalism. For example, I was looking some statistics where in Australia, 1% of the population of Australia actually controls 70-something% of the wealth. And you look at a place like the United States, which is meant to be one of probably the wealthiest country on earth, as they said, and you look at the amount of people who are homeless, people who died because they don't have. I think a couple of years ago, 67,000 Americans lost their lives because they did not have access to medical care, while the top insurance companies increase their profits by how many billions. And this is what you have. And then you compare that with China, that is building socialism with Chinese characteristics. And you look at how China has eradicated poverty and raised the standard of living of the people. And you know that there is something different at work here. So what the Chinese have been able to achieve and what other countries are doing, I saw socialism at work in Libya. I saw the free healthcare. I saw the healthcare, the subsidized electricity, free education, and everything. I saw it before it was overthrown. It had the highest standard of living in Africa, and that was so. We saw socialism at work. You know, socialism is not a utopia. We construct it and we move as we go forward. In the same way, capitalism, ever since the days that it battered the walls of feudalism and moved forward to its neoliberal stage, and now it has exhausted itself, and it's actually turning in. And I think we are witnessing, what we are seeing is that I don't think it's going to, it's no longer sustainable, and I think the collapse is near. But ever since we got the independence we got in 66, is what we in the OVP, the Organization for the Victory of the People, call flag and anthem independence. It is not an independence of substance. We have our own head of state who replaced the colonial governor and the queen. We have our own anthem and our own parliament. But we're captured, we're a neo-colonial state. Strategic decisions about Guyana is decided from outside and imposed on us. So we speak about the fight for true independence, to go beyond the flag and anthem independence, and to achieve true independence. And to achieve true independence, we have to have economic freedom and control of our national affairs without US imperialism, the UK and Canada, or the European Union telling us what to do.
Listen,
So would you? Oh,
sorry to jump in, but I just wanted to ask Gerald, um, do you have, I mean, does socialism, revolutionary, anti-imperialism have hope in Guyana?
Uh,
How do you
yes,
see it?
I'll tell you, because we have a tradition, there's a fighting tradition. The problem is most of the mainstream parties, they get money from big business, and those who pay call the tune. We have a position, we do not take whatever money we raise or obtain. It comes from our members, but we focus a lot of all. If you go to the internet and you check just Google all the political parties in Guyana, you will not see a website from any one of them, with the exception of one small right-wing party called the United Republican Party. And that website has been established for years and nothing added. But all the major parties, they do not have a website to visit. They have a Facebook. We are the only political formation, although we are small, that have a website. You can go to it and you can see our position is well articulated. You only have to Google it. It's www.ovpguyana.org, and you will see. And we're the only political organization that bring out flyers regularly to update the people on what is happening. In fact, we brought out one recently and we distributed thousands saying no to any military base in Guyana. Because recently, a former foreign minister of the ruling party, who was meant to be some big Marxist-Leninist, called for an American base in Guyana. Another one, who is a right-winger, who was once the leader of another small party and who's a regular columnist to a daily newspaper, called for the establishment of an American military base in Guyana. The main opposition, the People's National Congress, has not done that. And with all fairness to them, I don't think they would ever do that. But the former foreign minister of the PPP, one former foreign minister, called for American military base there. We opposed it, and we will always stand up against any, because any base in our country compromises our independence. That is trampling on our independence and sovereignty, and we want the Caribbean to remain a zone of peace. That's our position. We are growing. We are growing in support because we have been over the years very principled. And one of the things we keep telling the people of Guyana is that it doesn't matter which party gets into office, because being in office and having power are two different things. So you can be in office, but then important decisions about our country in terms of our foreign policy and how we deal with our economy is dictated to us. And we are a classic example of a neo-colonial captured state. So we keep educating people. We educate people, we work with people at the community level, that we also let them know that one of the biggest frauds ever invented on this planet, we do this with university students too, is what is called liberal democracy. Now, anyone who knows liberal democracy is a contradiction in terms. And what a lot of people are confused with is that there's a substantial difference between democracy and electocracy. So we keep elections every 5 years. But the people, you vote out political parties, but we don't vote out those who control the wealth of the country. So liberal democracy is a fraud. You only have to look at the United States. The United States has never been a democracy. Even Ramsey Clark, a former US Attorney General, said that. The US is a plutocracy. The US is ruled by the wealthy. Yeah. So it's the same thing, that what was left with us when we got this, what Walter Rodney referred to as briefcase independence or flag and anthem independence, we inherited something that the British left with us. And we have that farce every 5 years where we choose a political party, but there is no commitment to transformational politics. And that's why we speak about the politics of meaning, a revolutionary politics, because we are about realizing a real democracy. And real democracy is to create the mechanisms in forms of popular councils, people's assemblies that will involve the people at the grassroots level in the decision-making process. People must have a say in the decisions that impact their lives. liberal democracy, so-called liberal democracy, is a democracy for the wealthy and the few. And it is obsolete. And that is why you're seeing across the world a lot of vote apathy. People are not voting for people are turned off of political parties, these parties. And now there are books coming out called Abolish Politicians, The End of Politicians, and all of that. And that's why people like myself, I've never described myself as a politician. I see myself as a revolutionary or a political activist, because a politician is a bourgeois construct. Politics was meant to be the business of everyone, for the work and everybody. But the liberal democratic tradition took the politician and make him this professional, so you separate him from the masses. But politics is everybody's business. So I've never liked the term politician applied to me. I reject it. It's a bourgeois construct, because every citizen in the police, in the society, should be a politician.
This is exactly what I would be asking you about, since politics is everybody's business. I mean, it should be. But in case of Guyana, I will be asking you about the relation between the political parties and the people, and specifically, since I know that there are ethnic and racial divisions in Guyana. In all countries that were colonized by Britain, it's the same story. I suppose it will be the same in Guyana. So, what are the relations between the racial groups or ethnic groups in Guyana with specific political parties? And what about racism in the country? Is it a problem, or is it used for political purposes?
Well, when you look at the history of Guyana and colonialism, well, the force, the Africans in Guyana, African Guyanese, came to Guyana, to then British Guyana in the colony, as captured and enslaved people. But before that, the colonial powers, those who embarked in the colonial project, like the British, the French, the Spaniards, the Portuguese, and all that, you know that, in Venezuela, they came to Venezuela, the Spaniards. And so they committed genocide against the indigenous peoples. And then they brought, after enslaving, trying to enslave the indigenous peoples, they captured the Africans and brought them to work the sugar plantations and the cotton plantations and so on. And when slavery came to an end, slavery did not come to an end because the British woke up one morning, or the French or anyone, and decided that, they had an epiphany or a Paul on the road to Damascus transformation to end it. It was an African agency. The enslaved people resisted slavery, resisted it, until at the point where they realized it was the colonial powers, that it was no longer profitable, because estates were being burned, people were sabotaging the machinery, throwing spanners in the wheel and all of that. Because from the moment they were captured, they resisted enslavement. When slavery came to an end officially, in terms of its legal it was abolished. The British brought citizens, Indians from India, to work on their sugar plantations. The Dutch did it in Suriname, and the British did it too in Trinidad. And of course, they fooled the Indians before, when they entered into the arrangement with them. They deliberately misled them. So when the Indians arrived to work on the sugar plantations, there were many, they had an option of those who wanted to return, but the majority decided to stay on and build a home in what is today Guyana. And the Portuguese came too. The Portuguese came for a period, like after the African, to work but then they couldn't do the work that was necessary on the estates and so on. They moved on into commerce, into shopkeeping and other areas. The Chinese came and so. But what the British colonialists did was to create an environment of distrust and organize a society along ethnic lines. Like the Portuguese, because of where they originated from and their complexion, were given preference, although they didn't really consider the Portuguese European as such, but they put them in give them a particular status. And when the free Africans walked off the estate and pooled their money to buy certain villages, to establish early cooperatives and so, the colonial authorities, the colonial state sabotaged them. They flooded the lands and frustrated African economic development. And many Africans left the lands and went into the hinterland, into the outlying, into the hinterland areas to go and prospect for gold and so on. And over the years, the Indians moved out, the Indians who came and were involved in the sugar industry and so got involved in planting rice, and they became very strong in commerce and then start to move into other areas that were seen by a particular colonial a middle class that was shaped by the colonial powers, who felt that when the British left, that they were the class to manage the state, right? Because they were the ones who went to Oxford and Cambridge and returned and so on. So yes, our politics is people, the majority of people do vote along ethnic lines, because the two major parties, the People's Progressive Party, that was founded by Chedi Jagan, draws most of its support from Indo-Guyanese, and the People's National Congress Reform, that was founded by Forbes Burnham, that party enjoys the support of the majority of African Guyanese. But then you have other parties that will draw, that are in existence, but they don't draw enough votes to really tilt anything. What happened was the Alliance for Change, which got into a coalition with the People's National Congress Reform, they were able to defeat the PPP in the 2015 elections, because the two of the leading figures of the Alliance for Change, they were former members of the People's Progressive Party, two Indo-Guyanese. So they were able to bring over Indo-Guyanese votes, thus allowing the People's National Congress and the FC to win office. But then they lost in 2020 to the People's Progressive Party. We contested two elections. We contested in 2015 and 2020, but we ran at the regional level in Region 4 alone. And we did that because Region 4 is a very strategic region. It's where the capital is located, Georgetown. It has a very large population. And we entered just to get our message out and to see the level of support we have, but we didn't have the resources. And so, because to contest elections in Guyana, in all 10 regions, you have to have a huge war chest of money. And we have a policy: we do not take money from corporations or big business. We don't. And we did well. We did well, but this election's coming up, we're not contesting. We have a different approach to 2025, and that's what we're working on. But yes, people still vote. The majority still vote along ethnic lines, and there is racism, of course. There is racism, but the thing about it is what some people, the way some politicians address it is very simplistic. First of all, we have argued in the OVP that the problem in Guyana is really about have and have-nots. The problem in Guyana is the capitalist system. But since all the parties are committed to neoliberal economics, they're not in a position to mobilize the people along any revolutionary ideology. So they appeal to the race. The race issue is convenient. The race issue. So you get Indo-Guyanese voting for a party that is predominantly led by Indians and get Indian support. And you have the same thing on the other side, the People's National Congress reform with Afro and Guyanese. But yet, when these two parties get into office, their supporters remain in poverty. And what you have is a comprador class, an Indian comprador class and an African comprador class that become facilitators of monopoly capital, of foreign capital that plunders the country. And they call it investment. We refer to it as plunder by invitation. And we brought out a flyer. That's very popular with some stickers for cars and so, with the two parties on it, with their logo and their names. And it says, both it's scratched out and it says, anyway, you're screwed. So whoever you vote for, you will remain where you are, because the policies they pursue, all it has done over the years is to widen the gap between those who are rich and who are poor. In fact, one of the best kept secrets in Guyana is 16 families. The amount of land 16 families control. You can use the land of those 16 families, and if you put their lands together, I think you can construct homes easily for about 300,000 people. So when you go to the polls and you vote for these two parties, regardless of which one gets it, those families and big business always prosper. Why? Because for example, elections are constitutionally due this year, November. It might be held earlier. And the wealthy families and big business, they have 2 envelopes with money, millions, and they give to both parties. They make big donations to both parties. So whichever party gets into office, they have to repay big business by giving them tax concessions, cheap land, and all sorts of things, and contracts. Because if they don't, well, then the next elections, how are you going to get the money? So what you find is that take for instance, some contractors who are involved in construction and road building. Under previous government, some of the works that they did were shoddy. And instead of them being barred or being penalized, the new government comes in and the same people are allowed to go on to do the same thing because they make contributions to both parties. And that is what you have. That is what you have in Guyana. So you have the parties are pawns of big business, not just big business in Guyana, but now it is clear that ExxonMobil is heavily involved in our politics. In fact, one of the leaders of the of the political parties in Guyana, one of the leaders of a particular party in Guyana, the Alliance for Change, he is an attorney at law and he works for Exxon. And he said that he will only, he doesn't see a conflict of interest and he will only break off with Exxon if he's elected. I mean, this is, can you imagine that? And ExxonMobil, what a lot of the politicians don't understand, of course, some do, but they're afraid. ExxonMobil is not an ordinary transnational, ordinary company. ExxonMobil is an arm of United States imperialism. Exxon is directly involved. They're even financing sports. They're like, years ago, before we got independence, Guyana was referred to as Booker Guyana. Bookers that own the sugar, control the sugar industry. That is how you used to refer to it, because sugar was the dominant. Booker Guyana, meaning Guyana is owned by Bookers. Well, today it's Exxon Guyana, ExxonMobil Guyana. And ExxonMobil might want to deny certain things, but they're heavily involved in our political affairs. Now, let me share this with you. ExxonMobil, over the past few years, they've been holding these, what they call consultations, so-called consultations. So they held a number of them across the country. Well, they held one in Georgetown and they advertised, they said they were going to start 5 o'clock in the evening. Anyhow, a number of our activists, we turned up there. I went it. And we all went there in our uniform and so. And when I listened to the presentation by the 3 ExxonMobil officials, these people were downright deceivers and liars. So when it was a question and answers, I took the microphone and I told them up front, I said, this so-called consultation that Exxon is holding this afternoon, these were my words. I said, this is it's a well-orchestrated PR stunt to deceive the people of this country. I said that your history, wherever you go, is one of corporate plunder. I said you're corporate predators. You destroy the environment. And I know what you're doing in Guyana, you did in Venezuela. You were discovered and they kicked you out. And now you're doing the same thing here. I said, but your days are numbered. And I proceeded to, they cut the mic off. They prevented me from speaking. And I said, I expected that. And I told them what I had to say. We chanted and we left the meeting. But it was the first time in the history since ExxonMobil in Guyana, they never heard any person or organization, right, spoke to them like that. That is, talk to them like that. That is what we did. So it sent a shockwave across the country, of course. But we know we know ExxonMobil, that they're an arm of US imperialism.
Yes. This the consultation and your words that you mentioned, it became news in Venezuela as well. We
Yeah,
remember that, and we had probably published something
yeah,
on that as well.
yeah,
So we are talking about ExxonMobil and definitely United States. So we'll go into ExxonMobil a bit later. It
yeah.
is a theme in itself. However, we'll start with the US. So what has been the United States' historical role in Guyana? And since you mentioned militarization, and there is concern about militarization of Guyana in your country as well as everywhere, I mean, in Venezuela, in Brazil, etc. So, what is the extent of this militarization? How is it going? And would you say that the concerns are well founded?
Well, first of all, the United States, various US regimes have always interfered in the domestic affairs of Guyana. In fact, every country in their so-called backyard, You know, the US, when you look at the Monroe Doctrine, if you really study the Monroe Doctrine carefully, the Monroe Doctrine never really, it never really regarded or took the independence of Caribbean and other countries in their so-called backyard seriously. Haiti is a good example. So they've always interfered, like when the invasion of Grenada, the removal of Chedi Jagan government, and the destabilization of Forbes Burnham's government. They've always been interfering. And in the Caribbean, various organizations over the years and governments, Forbes Burnham in Guyana, Eric Williams in Trinidad, Michael Manley in Jamaica, then Errol Barrow in Barbados. Those are giants, towering giants of the Caribbean integration. They took a position that the Caribbean must be a zone of peace. And they opposed U.S. militarization. But then there were some CARICOM countries, some Caribbean leaders who were happy to be to use Mao Zedong's words, and that is what we use today for them, running dogs of imperialism. You know, that's what they are. Because, for example, let me give you an example. When there were plans to invade, when they were getting ready to invade Grenada, there was a meeting in Trinidad, and I think the Prime Minister then was George Chambers. And Prime Minister Chambers and Burnham and others met to find a Caribbean, for the Caribbean countries to resolve the issue of what was taking place in our Grenada. And while Burnham and Chambers were there and Manley discussing the thing, Eugenio Charles from Dominica and Tom Adams from Barbados, they got together with the Americans outside and made a decision to invade with Ciaga, CIA, as they call him, of Jamaica, to invade Grenada. You know, so you always had some Caribbean leaders who were happy to be factotums of U.S. imperialism, just surrogates, and there were those who stood up to them. And I can recall when President Burnham allowed the Cuban planes to refuel in Guyana as the planes were going on to Angola, because they used to stop in Barbados, and then Barbados was threatened, and Barbados put a stop to it. But Guyana allowed the planes taking Cuban fighters troops to Angola to refuel in Guyana. And the Americans threatened Guyana with that they will bomb the airfield, the airport, and so on. But that was the type of anti-imperialist position that people like Burnham and Michael Manley Burnham in Guyana, Michael Manley in Jamaica took. But there have been leaders who stood up to always oppose militarization, and there are others who just were happy to let the US have their way. And, you know, the Americans just recently went to Trinidad, and under this thing they come under this guise about fighting the trafficking in small arms and trafficking in persons and people and what have you, and to make your readiness prepared to be prepared for natural disasters and all that. But that's a camouflage, you know, that is a camouflage for military intervention. They set the base so they're ready whenever they want to intervene. And a number of us in the Caribbean, a number of our organizations in the Caribbean issued a statement. We signed it. It was drafted and signed, saying that, and you know, article sent out condemning the Trinidad and Tobago government on signing all of these things with the United States, because this is how I see it. This is how we see it. I'm talking from how my knowledge of the region and what I've seen throughout the world and our organization. They're putting, I believe, I think they already have some sort of base somewhere in Guyana. I don't know. But the idea is to encircle Venezuela. So you do that from Guyana, Trinidad, and if possible, from Colombia. But because, Colombia was, when you look at Colombia, there is no country in South America received more US military aid than Colombia. But now you have at least a progressive government in Colombia. But you can see what they're trying to do there. Carry these constitutional coups against you. They do. When you take up arms, they tell you that you have to you should lay down your arms and come and contest elections. When you do that and you win, they're constitutional coups. So I think we got to get back. My position is, I make no apologies for that, by what Malcolm X said, by the ballot or the bullet. We must be able to, for me, whichever up, I think the circumstances will determine which one is viable. I don't think it's cast in iron. And I make no apologies for looking at things that way. But yes, we are seeing the militarization. Yes, something is not right. I mean, let me give you an example. President Ali went to St. Vincent and sat down with President Maduro. And before the ink on the paper could dry, a British warship shows up in Guyana. I mean, something is not right here. A diplomat told me, in fact, a certain diplomat told me that a lot of pressure was applied to certain Caribbean leaders, not to make sure that meeting between President Ali and President Maduro did not come off. And you see it the minute before the president can fly back to Guyana, there was a British warship, and the British and the Americans don't want any peaceful resolution to this territorial controversy. And one of my position, we keep telling people, and I, from meeting people in the streets and asking people questions, a lot of people, I know this statement, I've met a lot of Guyanese working people, bus drivers, taxi drivers, laborers, who tell me that they do not believe that Venezuela wants to invade Guyana. They don't believe it. And we make it known that there are powers that are pushing this. Now, we remind them that this territorial controversy has always been used by imperialism against any government they don't like, whether that government is in Venezuela or it's in Guyana. Because when President Burnham was pursuing an anti-imperialist course, the United States was pushing Venezuela to invade Guyana. And Burnham launched the People's Militia. The US even sold F-16 fighters to Venezuela. Now, it has changed, where you have a revolutionary government in Venezuela, the Bolivarian Revolution, and now you have a right-wing government in Guyana. The US now is saying, we will stand with Guyana. The US is not interested in Guyana. The US is interested in Guyana's oil and in Venezuela's oil. And the US and Britain, their objective is to push Guyana to get push the situation to such a point where we get into conflict with Venezuela, and then the U.S. utilize bases probably in Guyana and Trinidad to destroy Venezuela, and then they take control of both countries. Both countries. That is their objective. That is what they want. So they're pushing this line that, oh, we have to have a military base here because Maduro wants to invade Guyana and all of that. But you cannot build military bases and surround the country in the same way we see where that happens to Russia, what NATO is doing, the US and NATO doing, expanding NATO to encircle Russia. So Putin is supposed to just sit there and allow NATO to expand and encircle him to the point of where Russia would be destroyed. It's the same thing for Venezuela. The government of Venezuela, the people of Venezuela cannot sit by and just allow the United States to encircle them by whether military base in Guyana or in Trinidad to encircle them. And Venezuela is our neighbor, and that is how it will be. That dynamic is not going to change. And we have to sit down and talk to each other without the colonial powers, without those who committed genocide against the indigenous people, who enslaved captured Africans, who indentured the descendants of, who indentured the Indians, those who came, the laborers from India, to tell us what we should do and what we should not do, and that we should not talk to each other. These people have no moral authority to do so, both, and even from a historical, when you look at it historically, and from a moral perspective, they have no right to. So as neighbors, we have to talk with each other. Without the United States and Canada and the EU and all of these countries that I've just identified, who are supporting, who are backing, openly supporting genocide in Gaza, to tell us that they're there to protect us. Let them go and protect the Palestinians. They cannot protect the Palestinians. They're supporting genocide. So they have no moral authority. And we say it openly and say, to hell with them.
So we'll go, so especially with the US arm, because ExxonMobil has been an arm of the US imperialism for more than 100 years in the region, when it was something else, when it was Standard Oil, from that time. So currently, since, what are the interests that ExxonMobil has in Guyana? And I'm not only talking about economic interests, but also political, because if I remember correctly, it was in 2022, or maybe the year before, I don't remember, 2022 or 2023, the Intercept even published reports that the ExxonMobil company had infiltrated the government of Guyana. So what sort of infiltration is that, and what exactly is ExxonMobil doing in Guyana, not just in terms of oil, but everything else?
Well, before the 2020 elections, general and regional elections in Guyana, I appeared on a television program, and the question was put to me about, well, at that time, Vice President Jagdeo, who's the Vice President Jagdeo, he was the leader of the opposition, and he said on the campaign trail that if the PPP is elected, they would renegotiate the contract with Exxon, the lopsided contract. When you look at that contract, we were told that some of the persons who assisted in drawing up that contract are involved or they are preparing to contest elections in the upcoming elections. And Vice President Jagdeo said, I'm trying to show that Exxon has its fingers in every pot in Guyana. So Vice President Jagdeo said that if the PPP is elected, they will renegotiate the contract. But on the TV program, when the question was posed to me, if the PPP win, if they would renegotiate the contract, and I said no. I said they will never renegotiate it. And I was asked why I took that position, and I said it is simple. I said the major parties are scared of imperialism. And when the PPP got in, they never renegotiated the contract. They're speaking now from talking about renegotiation, now about the sanctity of the contract, that you can't renegotiate it and all of that. Because now the opposition, the ones who were inside, who signed the lopsided contract today, are calling for renegotiation. And this is a comedy, because we're showing the people how they are fooling them. Because none of the parties in Guyana, none of the parties can bring Exxon to the table and make Exxon renegotiate. Because it's not just Exxon you're bringing to the table, you're bringing U.S. imperialism. Exxon is about monopoly capitalism, and monopoly capitalism is imperialism in the highest form, as Lenin pointed out. You don't have to be a Leninist or a Marxist to acknowledge that truth. And Exxon is in every, as I said, their fingers in every pot. Exxon is sponsoring, Exxon is even making huge donations to the Department of Environmental Science at the university. Exxon is even, I think, even in sports. So Exxon now, it's like, as I said, Exxon Guyana. And of course, there are certain political parties that Exxon are going to push. Now, Exxon will tell people, as one, I think their CEO in Guyana said that they don't support political parties. You can tell that to a baby. I doubt a baby will believe that. Anyone, we know how Exxon operates. Exxon always support right-wing political parties and political parties and governments that will allow them to plunder the oil and gas resource of the country that they're operating in. That's their track record. And none of our politicians, whether they're in the PPP, the ruling party, the opposition party, or some of the minor ones who just got a one seat in parliament, whether it's the new and united Guyana, all of these parties are prepared to bow to Exxon and U.S. imperialism. So, based from what I'm seeing and what we're aware of, Exxon has definitely infiltrated every area, right? Not only the political parties, but civil society groups, civil society, and many of the NGOs. We call these NGOs nothing going on. They're Trojan horses for imperialism. They like to appear as though they're apolitical or non-political, but they're not. And, years ago, the first president of an independent Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, wrote a book called Neocolonialism, the final stage of imperialism. And Nkrumah, what Nkrumah wrote then, and you look at it, what is happening today in Guyana, it is so relevant because it goes back to what I said earlier. We are not truly independent, and that's why we speak about the fight for true independence or to complete our liberation struggle. We speak about the second liberation struggle. The second liberation struggle is to achieve true independence, to take control of our resources so that we can have economic justice, to remove the concentration of wealth in the few hands, whether it's by the comprador bourgeoisie or by foreign capital such as Exxon that is plundering our country. And we talk about development and development, but it's not people's development. It's not sustainable, harmonious development, and we draw the line between growth and development. You can have economic growth with tremendous poverty. We've seen that. You have countries with that. So Exxon, companies like Exxon could never bring, the roads will widen, we will see more expensive cars, they're building hospitals, more hospitals are being built, but by the private sector. So the healthcare system, healthcare is not a human right. As socialists, we believe that the right to healthcare, it's a human right. It's a human right. It's not a commodity to be bought and sold, and it is not something to be regulated by market forces. So you're going to have all of these private hospitals, and to go to them would be very costly because some of the people who are building these hospitals, who are going to own these hospitals, they're in road construction, they're in security, they're in many things. So going into the health into the health industry, that's business too. And the poor people will have to go to the public hospital and wait for hours to be attended to. So that is what that is happening in the country. This is not people-centered development. We are going to have, there will be more hotels, the roads will widen, more expensive cars, but the masses of our people are going to remain in poverty. And that is what neoliberal economic policies or the neoliberal phase of capitalism does. You look at every part, any country on planet Earth that it was implemented, it has not been able to close the gap between the have and the have not. There's growing inequality in income and wealth and the concentration of power in fewer hands. So ExxonMobil, as we know, is not just an ordinary company, it's an arm of US imperialism, and it's going to it has already started to shape the politics of our country. And by politics, I mean here the party politics.
So you talked about the contract, that it is a very lopsided contract. So what exactly is in the contract that makes it lopsided, that puts Guyana in a secondary position and ExxonMobil in the driving force, let's say? So what is in the contract?
Well, the contract, I have not really gone through it. I've seen it, but it's the contract. When you look at the contract, it's a lot. It's a huge, in terms of the volume, right, of what had been put together. And there is some commentators are saying, well, when you look at the contract, they doubt that those who signed it really read the contract through, right? They just signed the contract. I don't think those who signed the contract had any sort of choice as such. I don't think those people I don't see them as patriots. For me, And our organization, those people who signed that contract, I'll get to the upside, who signed that contract in terms of what Guyana is getting from it in terms of royalties and all of that, that is a betrayal. That is a betrayal of our country. Those people are not patriots. And I think they are, what they did could only be considered treason. It's treason because they have given away our national, the patrimony of the people to a foreign entity that is an arm of the US Leviathan or the hegemon. They have given away that. They had a right before we signed that contract. The people of this country, since the wealth and resources, the resources of this country belong to the people of this country. The people of this country had a right to know what they were signing on to. This thing was kept a secret. In fact, they got a signing bonus, the claim of 18 million, which was odd because normally if you give us bonus, you'll make it 20 million or something. But for some reason, they got 18 million US dollars. And at that time, the people, Guyanese people, did not know anything about this signing bonus until it was discovered by the then opposition party that is now the government. So there's this level of secrecy. And this is still going on. It happened with the previous government and the same thing with the present government. And the people of this country don't really know what is going on. And even those persons who are critical of the government, who are critical of the previous regime and the present government, they still don't understand what imperialism is all about. Let me give you an example. One commentator, I think President Biden said, he said Exxon made more money, I think last year, made more money in the past year, 2 years than at that time than God. That's what Biden said. So one commentator was saying, look, you can bring Exxon to the table. Look, President Biden is saying, Exxon made so much money. So they'll say, well, if Biden could condemn Exxon, why can't the Guyana government? But all Biden was saying, look, Biden is saying, look, you have made X amount of money. We protect you. You're an arm of us. Give us our share. It's like three thieves going to break and enter place, but one of the thieves, he financed the operation. He bought the cell phones and the implements to break into the building. And then they stole the stuff, sold it, and they made $10 million. And when the time comes to divide it, two of the thieves are telling the one who spent the money on the implements and the phones and everything to make the operation smooth, we have to burst this thing half. He said, no, I spend X, Y, and Z and I have to get this. So Biden and Exxon are like two thieves rowing over the spoil. That's what they're doing. And people who can't really who don't understand how imperialism operates would say, well, look, we can get something out of Exxon because Biden is saying, give us some more. But Exxon, as we said, is an arm of US imperialism. And when you kick Exxon out of your country, then you will see how US imperialism will come down on you, like what they did to Venezuela.
And as far as I know, in case of this oil contract, it was Exxon itself that created or that elaborated the environmental impact report. So it's like
they did
Exxon itself.
everything.
Yeah, they did
They did
everything,
everything.
including the environmental impact report. And they are drilling in the sea. I mean, it's an offshore block.
Yeah.
in disputed waters even. So that will, I think that Jesus will take up from here.
Yeah.
We'll be discussing about Exxon
Yeah.
and Venezuela and Guyana, etc., about which we have been
They,
publishing.
they drafted the contract. It's like, a landlord and a tenant. The landlord drafts the terms of, you're occupying the building, and you read it and then you sign. Good. But this is this is what Exxon did, right? Exxon, we're meant to be the owners of the land, but Exxon dropped the contract, tossed it us, and our misleaders signed it. Our misleaders signed on to it.
Listen, Gerald, you already talk about the Exxon's operations and how it will expand, widen some roads and bring some new cards and stuff like that. And the next question is about that. I mean, the IMF and other lending organizations has been talking in recent years about how incredible the Guyanese GDP has been moving up, something around 40 or 50% annually. So the question is, how that GDP growth has helped Guyanese people in terms of health, infrastructure, human development indexes, and things like that? I mean, what can you tell us about that? I mean, the impact of this GDP growth on the regular Guyanese people.
You know, the GDP, using GDP, progressive political economists have always exposed the use of the GDP to show that that does not really measure the way uh, growth or so-called development impacts people's lives in any meaningful way. Like, for example, when I attended that so-called consultation, Exxon had one of their employees who's Guyanese. They had this young lady who was speaking about that Exxon's operation in Guyana will bring more, we will have more hotels, and it will create more jobs here and there and all of that, and that will expand. So I decided to give the young lady a lecture on what about GDP and what constitutes real development. And I gave an example of a place like Brazil, where Brazil produces from a pin to a missile. And yet, with all the growth that the Brazilian economy had showed for years, there's massive poverty in Brazil. And many other countries, you can see that. Nigeria, that has been producing oil and gas for years, still have tremendous energy problems. Tremendous energy problems. And I am talking to Nigerian activists. The levels of poverty have increased tremendously in Nigeria. In Guyana, what we're seeing is, yes, you're going to see more hotels, but the problem is that some people went ahead and construct hotels believing that with Exxon's presence in Guyana, a lot of these hotels will be utilized. But Exxon now has identified an area on the east coast of Guyana where it's going to build a huge headquarters with a huge area for a lot of for those who are working with it, their executives and so to reside. They'll have a golf course, night spot and bar. So it's like creating a little mini state within a state. They will be there. And their own nightclubs. And so, of course, they will bring in a lot of their own food and drinks and so from outside. And many of the hotels are going to remain empty because there is no proper planning. People just believe that, that with these hotels, people are just going to come into them. So you're going to get a lot of rooms and so empty. But apart from that, since we have been producing oil and gas, the cost of living have skyrocketed. The price of food has gone through the rooftop. Rent, the cost of to rent a house or an apartment is more, people cannot afford it. Some people have moved into homes with members, with relatives and other members of the extended family. And so, yes, there are expensive cars on the road. Yes, they're more cheap. They're cars, there are more cars on the road. And so people, because what is happening now is those who import the secondhand cars are giving a cheap, making certain arrangements that can make people afford to take out a car. But then sooner or later, they miss 2 payments and the cars are repossessed. The cars are repossessed and then sold. But what we are saying is that the presence of ExxonMobil and the growth, yes, they're talking about the economy showing growth, but what is coming in from the economy in terms of the growth and the returns, where is it going? We are having blackouts sometime every day. We have blackouts for long periods. We haven't been able to solve that. The price of the food in the supermarkets and in the markets have, as I said, gone through the roof. There is rising crime. There's a lot of armed robberies and all of that taking place. And of course, those economic problems are going to create all sorts of social problems and complications we're going to be faced with. But what we're seeing is that the rise, putting up high-rise buildings and expensive cars on the roads of Guyana does not constitute a people-centered development, because at the end of the day, it is not touching the lives of the working people, and nothing is being done to at a meaningful at the level of some level of state intervention, because these people believe that the present government and the previous government believed that you should leave it to the private sector and let the private sector be the engine of growth. So that's the mantra. But we know that the private sector, no private sector in any part of the world has ever built a country. That's not the role of the private sector. The private sector is there to build their own business and to increase their profits. That's what the private sector does. So it is the role of the state to intervene meaningfully in the economy and to ensure that the strategic resources of the country is used to raise the standard of living in the people and for the people's well-being. We're not seeing that. We're not seeing that, and we're not going to see that in Guyana once we're following this neoliberal model and with the presence of ExxonMobil.
Thank you, Gerald.
What you're seeing, what we have is we have a section of the middle class that has grown, because these are the people who have a university or education, and some of them got jobs with Exxon and so. But Exxon is also bringing in some of its own workers. Exxon is bringing in some of its own workers. And recently we know of a case where I know a case where, and this has happened in a number of areas, an individual who's a very good heavy machine operator went for a job as a crane operator, and he had to do a medical test. And when he went, the lab that he was sent to is where Exxon was sending the people to go and do their blood tests. And when he went, the test showed that he was using marijuana. And he said, that's not true. He said, I don't even smoke cigarette. This is important. So I'm sharing it with you. He said, I don't smoke cigarettes. Must it's marijuana. Don't know what it looks like. So that is it. So he went back and he told the people who got the subcontract to do the work for Exxon what happened. So he decided to proceed again. So what he did the next time, he went to 3 places and take the blood test and it showed negative all the time. Then he went back to the one that was doing the work for Exxon, and it showed again positive for marijuana. You know what they were doing? And then one of the people didn't want to, they say, I'll talk off the record, because something, it shows clearly, and this is what we are reading, that Exxon and maybe this company has an arrangement to make sure that maybe the Guyanese heavy duty equipment operators don't get the job. So the way of doing that is to showing that they're showing substance, like marijuana or some other substance that could be considered illegal in their blood, in their veins, and they don't get the job. And then those who Exxon bring in will get the job. And since that case, we have had more evidence of that. We've had more evidence of that. So, and many workers who are working with Exxon have told us the way that they're treated. They're abused, they're not treated properly, they're not paid for, what they're supposed to be paid for and all of that. But they can't go to the unions. They can't go to the unions. So Exxon is above. Exxon is an entity unto itself. And I think a former diplomat said to me that there was some meeting being arranged by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and an official from Exxon heard about it and called the minister who was responsible at the time and said that you need to invite us to the meeting. So Exxon wanted to sitting at this meeting, and they made it known that they actually have a department that they could consider it's like an equivalent to a foreign affairs ministry. So I'm showing you that, that our people still need to understand that how powerful Exxon is. It's a very powerful entity. It has infiltrated not just at the governmental level, the political parties, the main political parties, but the NGOs, civil society groups and all of that, and even the University of Guyana. So many mouths are muzzled because of the donations that they're getting from Exxon and so on. But yes, I just lost a little part of the end there. So if you could, if there's anything I missed out, if you could just highlight it back, let me cover it.
No, everything's great. Actually, when you talk about the unions, it brings an alarm on me. I'm right now wondering what are the unions like in Guyana, and if they are strong enough to, confront a big monster like ExxonMobil.
Well, some unions, we have examples, cases of where unions, where they're representing the workers in certain companies or so, they have taken donations from the company. For example, like certain companies bought motor vehicles for union leaders. So here you have a vehicle that is doing work for a union, but it was bought not by the union or by the donations of the members of the union, but by the company that employs the workers. So that's the type of thing you have. So when the time comes, the unions do not stand up. Few of them do stand up to those companies because they're bought, they're compromised.
That's terrible. That's terrible. But it's not only happening in Guyana. That happens everywhere. I mean, when there's not a state strong enough to, resist.
That's right.
Yes, and another thing that when you were talking, bring an alarm in my head was because we were talking about GDP. I was trying to go back to Venezuela's history and how we change our economic production structure framework when we transition from an agricultural state to an oil producing state. because of the gringos came and began to push towards that direction, not because we decided to do so. So it happened somehow the same way that how it is happening right now in Guyana. And my question or my alarm is related to, is people in Guyana thinking about how to protect the current economic sectors that are doing a little bit a good job there? Do you understand what I'm trying to tell you? I mean, I worry about the few economic sectors that are doing well in Guyana being destroyed by oil production.
If I may add, I think I would particularly mention agriculture. What about
Yeah.
agriculture? Because that is the one that was destroyed in Venezuela by oil production 100 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, Guyana, I think ever since when President Burnham was alive, they discovered oil in Guyana many years ago. And there was a company called Home Oil that came in. And Home Oil wanted, they said that they were going to develop the oil industry and so get involved, but they wanted a certain percent, share, how much they must have. And President Burnham turned it down. And he said that if Guyana can't benefit properly from it, then leave it in the ground. And he was more interested in pursuing agricultural development because his dream and vision was about Guyana becoming the breadbasket to the Caribbean. And I can recall the days in Guyana when, you used to buy, of course, these are different times. Of course, things change, but you used to get 100 oranges for $1 and all of that. And there was people weren't going hungry because there was this whole thing about urban agriculture and utilizing land in the city and all of that. And many people were doing that type of farming and all of that. Today, Guyana's importing tamarind, coconut water, you name it, plantain chips, all of that we're importing. You go into the supermarkets and you see it is filled with food from Miami, from all over the world. And just a few products are made in Guyana. Good. So, and there is this tendency to buy foreign products, all part of the colonial mentality, and to ignore their local products. You have that. But since ExxonMobil is in Guyana, this is what has happened. For example, some of their big business people, for example, if you had a businessman or a company that has been, let's say, in a set in hardware, huge hardware store selling hardware, that company, that family-owned business has gone into a business that they've created a business, or in some cases teamed up with other businesses to do work for Exxon. Good, like they are what they call the gas to shore project, and so three wealthy families came together. One that is very wealthy, one that is involved in quarrying, gold mining, construction. Good. This is what has happened. You got a businessman or a big businessman who started off in gold mining, but he has moved from gold mining. He's in gold mining now. He has gone to quarrying, and he's gone into construction. So since ExxonMobil's presence in the country, you're seeing that some of the big business people have moved. Instead of staying in one area, they have expanded it to other areas. So if a person has been in rice production traditionally, they are still in rice production, but they've gone into gold, they've gone into providing services like land where Exxon could store equipment and so on and so on. And this is what is happening. So wealthy families now, if a family traditionally concentrated in gold mining, that family is now in healthcare, they're now in construction, they're now in security. That is what is happening. Good. Like there is one company that they have created a special business that provides transportation for ExxonMobil officials. Good. And they have hundreds of vehicles, buses and everything and all of that. And they have the contract. So small people, if you have a small taxi service, you cannot compete. They have the monopoly because they have wealth. They move wealth from other area to establish that. And this is what is going on. So you find wealth is being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, and a few families have their fingers in every area in all the of the economy. Whether it is building, those who are in building, you will find, or in construction, you will find them in oil and gas, you will find them in gold mining, you will find them in quarrying, you'll find them in the building hospital, you'll find them in security, you'll find them in aviation. Most of these people now have their own aircraft, and they're even providing transportation to the hinterland area and to neighboring countries such as Trinidad and Barbados. This is what is happening, and it started sometime, but now it's since ExxonMobil's presence in Guyana, this is the trend. So you're seeing a monopoly, you're seeing the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. So if you're speaking about Company A is involved in aviation, they're involved in road construction, they're involved in housing, they're involved in hospital building and security and everything. And these people that I'm talking about, they have connection to the major political party.
They are the oligarchs of
that's right. So and you have the comprador bourgeoisie, this comprador class that colludes with the bureaucratic state bourgeoisie, because remember that those people who work in the higher echelons of the state apparatus, they don't own any means of production and so, but because of their relation, because of where their situation, their position in the state, they can easily facilitate the comprador middle class and foreign capital. And this is where all the corruption, you have so much corruption, from top to it's just across.
Listen, I'm going to jump to the next question, Gerald. We still, after this one, we still have two more. This one is about another issue, but it's of course related. And it's about the state of the media in Guyana. I mean, we want to know from you, how do you evaluate the state of the media there? How is the media landscape? Who dominate? Is it a local, capital or foreign capital? Is there a space for alternative media there? What are how is the presence of social media platform there? We would like to know about those things.
Yeah, well, the state of the media. After, when President Hoyt came into office, before Hoyt came into office, you had the state-owned newspaper, the Guyana Chronicle. You had the various parties. The PPP got its weekly paper called the Mirror, and the People's Progressive, and the new PNCR's paper, the New Nation. And when then there was an opening, because President Bornham was accused of stifling that's what they said, of stifling the free press and all that. That was the nonsense that was being peddled at that time. And then under Hoyt, they opened up and they allowed a newspaper that is in existence up to today called the Stabroek News. The Stabroek News is a private newspaper. It was given a grant. It was started with money from the National Endowment for Democracy, which is based in the US. You know, the National Endowment for Democracy. Some people, we call it the National Endowment for the Destruction of Democracy. And you know, the International Republican Institute, the educational arm of the Republican Party, and the International Democratic Institute, both are affiliated to NED. So to the NED. So they assisted the Stabroek News in setting up their newspaper. But we have the Guyana Chronicle, which is state-owned. And that newspaper, it will carry the message and parrot the message of the ruling party of the day. So whichever government comes in, you know, they use that paper, the Chronicle, to push their agenda. Then you have a paper called the Kaichor News, which is private. It's owned by one Mr. Glenn Lal. And I must give him credit for some of the things he's been carrying. And he has a radio program. And on his radio program, he takes a position that that Guyanese are being fooled, right? To push for war with Venezuela when Venezuela is our neighbor and all that. So when you listen to him, he has a number of things right. Good. He has a number of things right. And we've been able to get a number of he carries a lot of our letters and releases and so. The Stabroek News, on the other hand, that likes to speak about free press and all of that, we had 2 marches in Georgetown in support of the Palestinian struggle. And those marches, the 2 marches we had were well attended. The first march had about over 1,300 persons, and the second march had about 800. I spoke at one of those marches. And the Kaichor News carried those marches, publicized them, and ever since the genocide started in Gaza, the Kaichor News carries on its front page at the top, telling you what Israel is doing and how many Palestinians are there. The Stabroek News, on the other hand, never covered the marches. Not a picture, not a report on the marches. But when Assad was overthrown by these heretical Islamic groups, the Stabroek News carried on the front page that Assad was overthrown. They were happy, but they didn't carry anything on Palestine. No, I know this. I got this from very, very reliable sources, that the ambassador of the European Union in Guyana called the editor-in-chief of that newspaper that I spoke about that was funded by the NED, tell them not to carry anything on Gaza. So this is the level of interference you have. So the EU is a partner. The EU is involved in genocide. Then I read only last week where a member of the European Union office in Georgetown met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs to discuss the role of civil society, good governance, and human rights. Can you imagine? My dear sister and brother, I'm telling you this, as the run-up to the 2025 elections, we are going to make ourselves available when these people are going to talk. And what we are going to tell them, it's going to shock the world, because we will stand up right there and confront the Western diplomats in Georgetown. And what we will tell them, it will be unprecedented in the history of Guyana. The media in Guyana, as I said, You have the state-owned chronicle that pushes the government of the day line. The Stabroek News is definitely pro-Western because they were set up by the NED, helped created them, and they represent a section of that traditional middle class, a middle class that believed that when the British left Guyana, that they were the people who are culturally sophisticated and educated to manage the new plantation. And the Stabroek News has been the voice of that class, right? And any it is happen, it is happy, sorry, to carry the views, the political views of that class and any party that they form. For social media, there's a lot of that. A lot of Guyanese, a lot of people sometimes do not read the newspaper. People go on social media, but TikTok and so we have a lot of TikTok philosophers, and so we call them. But what you see on TikTok and the social media is not, it doesn't really deal with the issues confronting our country. It is most things, it's sensational, like what minister is doing this, which minister owns this, which minister is in business with it. That is the type of thing. As I said, our politics, there is nothing philosophical. There is nothing of substance. It's not about dealing with what the nation is faced with. Imperialism, control of our country's resources, and our politicians going along with the dictates of imperial powers. That is not addressed. And the people who address these issues are not, the views are not ventilated. We do not get to air our views. I have written letters to the Stabroek News, and what they do is they chop your letters in such a way that when you read it, some of it doesn't make sense. Like the Israeli ambassador wrote a huge letter in the Stabroek News, and the same letter appeared in a number of Caribbean papers. And I wrote an extensive letter confronting the fictitious invention of the Israeli ambassador, and nobody said anything. And it appeared, but the Stabroek News, from then on, they just carry certain things and then they don't. They allow it because they have to appear. They want to appear that they're free press, but they're very hostile to socialism, socialist ideas. Very hostile to the Bolivarian Revolution. They carry syndicated columns from people who are, like
haters.
anti-Cuba, anti-Venezuela, things against Iran, all the progressive and anti-imperialist countries,
Got it.
So that is what. But they've also, the local media, many of them, they just regurgitate what they get from the Western media. They will publish things from the BBC, take things from CNN and so. But you don't see things coming from, they don't take pieces from Sinwa News Agency or RT News or other, international
alternative
media
sources.
houses. Yes, they don't. Or pieces from like Grandma. So they don't. You look at it and you look at the language too that some of them use. Like when, some of the journalists, they're not even journalists. I call them stenographers. They use words when they're referring to President Maduro or President Mugabe or Saddam or any leader of the global south that the West doesn't like. They use the word strong man.
Yes.
Strong man.
Authoritarian
Right?
ruler.
Yeah. But Trudeau or Bush or Trudeau or Biden or Trump are not described as strong men.
Oh, they are the good guys.
And warlords. Warlords are for African and global South leaders. And then you get that type of thing. So that's, but that is, we only have, then we have another daily newspaper called another daily called the Guyana Times, which is closely affiliated to the ruling party. And one their regular columnist is the person who, the right winger, who called for an American military base in Guyana so as to protect us from Venezuela. Well, I stopped sending letters to them and press releases a long time because they don't ever carry our so much to the free media in Guyana. They don't ever carry it. But we do a lot of flyers. We reach people in the street. We get out to people in the street because people still like a flyer and they keep it, you know.
That's important.
People
Yes.
read it when they have time and so. So we do a lot of that. We do a lot of that. There's no political organization in Guyana that brings out flyers, you know.
Listen,
And we put,
sorry, and
yeah,
websites like alternative independent websites with alternative content, is it there, something like that?
yeah. Well, we encourage people. We
What is?
encourage people, and we encourage people to go to follow. Like a lot of people are now tuning into RT and other,
Yeah.
you know, international news agencies and so. So all like this now with Orinoco Tribune, if you go to our website, we have, you will see it. We have our programs and so projects and so articles that we publish. The next thing we are putting up on our website is our allies and links, you know, parties that we have fraternal relations with who we support and so. So under this Orinoco Tribune, we're going to put that up.
Thank you.
That will be up very soon, not too long from now. I'll say about in the next 2 weeks, so people can follow it, and we send them to it so that people can see interviews and read the alternative news. So, but I'll tell you what has been happening. What is taking place in Gaza, not only in Guyana, has jolted the war, a lot of people into to face the reality. You know that these people who talk about human rights and democracy and freedom are downright hypocrites
And
and
terrorists.
have a selective morality and are working with terrorists to overthrow. They work with terrorists, and this has been going on a long time, work with terroristic outfits to overthrow governments who they do not like, that they're opposed to. And people are seeing it. People are seeing it. I can tell you, there's a waking up. People are seeing it
Yes, that's
in
true.
Guyana too, because the average person in the street that I have met, I talk to people, I ground with people. I don't mix with the bourgeoisie, and I mix with people who are unemployed every day. I listen to them, and they do not believe. They don't buy the fallacious narrative that President Maduro in Venezuela wants to invade Guyana. Good. People know that the United States is pushing and they're feeding the Guyana government. That's what they're good at. A lot of lies. A lot of lies. This is what they do. They feed you a lot of lies, and just in the way that France, that is why France was kicked out of the Sahel countries. The French were supposed to be there to fight these so-called jihadists, but they were managing them. They were managing them. They were allowing them to attack the Malian forces, and then they will come in. And it's a way to say, well, look, you need us. You need the French presence. You need us because you can't fight these people. But then the Sahel countries said, no, something isn't right. And we knew it. I knew it from years back because we wrote about this when Gaddafi said he was fighting Al Qaeda. Good. These groups are supported ever since the days in the fight when they support the Western powers, especially the US, supported the so-called Mujahideen in Afghanistan against the Soviets. And they facilitated, they supported these groups. They collaborated with the Saudis, the Imperialism and the Saudis and the Pakistani intelligence services created these groups in Afghanistan. And then from Afghanistan, many of them, the fighters, returned to their countries. They call them the returnees. And then they start to destabilize the countries. Like when the FIS launched its insurgency in Algeria years ago to overthrow the Algerian government, and they've never stopped since then. So people are waking up to what is going on. People are seeing the double standards and the hypocrisy. And what we try to do is we direct people to tell them, don't bother with BBC, don't bother with CNN, because people are seeing the lies that they're peddling, And that paper, just in telling you, that paper I mentioned to you, that daily, that is known as the Guyana Times, that columnist, any column he writes on Venezuela, he refers to President Maduro as Mad Maduro, and that you cannot do that. And I don't believe in writing letters to such people, but I will eventually run into him and let him know what we think, because that is not what you do. That is not what you do. But he will never write. Now, Trump is the new president, the coming president. He will never refer to Trump as mad. They would never do that because they know that will have consequences for them. So he will never refer to. But Trump is talking about taking the Panama Canal over, if necessary, military force. He's talking about taking Greenland from Denmark. And he's threatening countries that if you de-dollarize, what's going to happen to you and all of that. But he's not going to refer to Trump as mad.
Yes, that's true.
So that is what we're dealing with. That's the level of ignorance and misinformation and the distortion that we're dealing with.
That's why it's so important to try to push for alternative, media sources, even on internet. And I believe that what you say about your website, even
Yes.
your organization might have. I know that that's not easy, and some people believe that it's too complicated. But having a section of news in your website might be a good way to try to. Of course, you need people to do that, but sometimes it's not as hard as some people believe. You know
No,
what
it's
I'm
not
talking
as
about?
it's not.
So
Yeah.
maybe
And
that
then,
could open a door for
of course,
the Guyanese people, news sources or whatever.
yeah.
I'm just saying,
And then and you can also see we have an ideological political education arm. It's called the George James Institute. We run programs. Before the COVID, we had direct classes, face-to-face classes, and then a number of our cadres graduated from that. And then we had online programs, and we have a new program starting in the next 2 months or so.
That's important.
But we go through things about colonialism, what is imperialism, the struggle for true independence, class struggle. We explain all these things to people, and we get them to read this recommended. And then if you go to our website, you'll see there's a tremendous reading list, books that are recommended in different categories.
That's important.
From liberation theology and all of that. Because one of the things we do in our political and educational work is this. We tell people that if you say you're a Christian or you say you're a Muslim, if you really understand the message of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, if you really understand the message of Islam, if you understand what Jesus preached, then you will see that those two noble teachers and their books, when you look at it, it is anti-capitalist. It is anti-capitalist. You cannot say you're a Christian and support neoliberal economics.
That reminds me of
Neoliberal
Chavez.
economics is about rugged individualism.
That reminds me of Chavez,
But,
Chavez talked a lot about that.
Yeah, that's right. Von Mises said that for neoliberalism, for capitalism to triumph, right? Christianity, he said it cannot triumph totally unless Christianity is removed. So you cannot say you're a Muslim or a Christian or even a Buddhist. And that's why you have what is called Buddhist communism. And if you understand the noble teachings of these teachers, you cannot support any project that is aimed at increasing the wealth of a few over the majority. I am my brother's keeper. I have to look out. Greater love has no one than the one who will lay down his life. It's in the John Gospel. So the socialistic nature of the Gospel. Socialism is in the Gospels. It's in the Quran. And this is what we have to appeal to get our people to understand, that the message of Jesus and the message of Islam is liberatory. It's not just a pie in the sky waiting for salvation in the air. It's here. It's a concrete, we have to struggle. Because Martin Luther King himself said that to be a Christian is to stand against militarism and to stand against capitalism. Martin Luther King said that.
That's true. We need to jump to the next question.
Yeah.
It might be the most controversial one.
Yeah.
But let me read it to you. What is the general view about Venezuela and Guyana? You already mentioned a little bit something about that, especially amid the escalation over the Essequibo dispute. Do you think that the current Guyanese government strategy to abandon the 1966 Geneva Agreement will be fruitful? I know that this question might be divisive. Of course, I'm Venezuelan, and I believe that Guyana is ours, and you are Guyanese, and I'm pretty sure that
Yeah.
you believe that. I'm talking about the Essequibo territory, sorry, and I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure that you believe that the Essequibo territory is yours. But anyway, I mean, I believe that there's always like an analysis to make, an an historical track to follow, and that's why we raise these precise questions, just to go into, these important issues.
Yeah. Well, first of all, when we address this issue, I always start on the grounds that I am anti-colonialist. Our philosophy, we're anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist. We know the history of Venezuela and the history of Guyana. And we must look at the genesis of this, that the Spanish invaded that area, committed genocide against indigenous people, and then they carved up, borders were created, land were created. The British did the same, the Dutch and the British in this area, and so on. So when we are addressing this issue as anti-colonialists and anti-imperialists, we have to take this into account. Now, when I study this border controversy, this territorial controversy, there's a lot that is not really coming out, and people are playing political football with it. The United States initially was always there in Venezuela's corner under previous regimes. And when the U.S., I think during Grover Cleveland time, I think it was, when Venezuela submitted all the documents and so to go to have this arbiter to discuss the issue, and so Venezuela was happy to submitted everything to the U.S. and so, and Britain was upset about it at the time. I think the British were involved in the Boer War that was going on, and so. And I think the British Prime Minister was also the Foreign Minister, Palmerston. He said that he was annoyed about the whole thing. And somebody said to the Americans, why not invoke the Monroe, the doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine on Britain? And the British Foreign Minister said the Monroe Doctrine has no validity in international law. Right? And then there was this talk about Britain might end up at war with the US and so. But then somewhere along the line, nothing was heard again from this thing. Venezuela was somehow disappointed. And they said that, oh, well, maybe Britain was taken up with what was happening in South Africa and all of that. But what I'm saying is the Geneva Agreement of 66 is that the thing about that is that you can always go back to it until you find some sort of resolution. you use that to discuss things and go back and all that. And I feel that is the way forward for Venezuela and Guyana, because nothing can change who we are. We are neighbors, and that is how it's going to be. And we have to find a way to arrive at some sort, because Guyana was granted authority to administer Essequibo under the agreement. But I think this thing goes back to understand what's going on now. I think you can recall when Guyana got independence in 1966. And you had a president in Venezuela by the name of Romulo Betancourt. So Cheddy Jagan was elected premier, the first Marxist premier in 1961. Good. And then you had Betancourt in 1962. So Venezuela got winked that Guyana was becoming independent in 1966. And remember, there was a case called the Beria case, because there was an armed guerrilla insurrection in Venezuela. And Betancourt, who had the ear, who could have called President Kennedy anytime, he felt that the communists would be able to use, the insurrection would be able to use Guyana as a base to operate from against the Venezuelan government. So this thing is, of course, the Americans had to be playing Venezuela, America going on with it, because Cuba was enough. At the time, you had to see when the Cuban Revolution happened, and Cheddy Jagan was talking about relations with Cuba and all of that. So I think when Betancourt said that the arbitration tribunal of 1899 was considered null and void, I believe at that time Betancourt was being prompted by the Americans. Good, because they were afraid of a Marxist-Leninist government coming back into power in Guyana. And my position has always been that this territorial controversy has always been used, as I said earlier, against any government, whether that government happens to be in Venezuela or Guyana, by imperialism. I am not one, I don't believe that Venezuela wants to invade Guyana. I know that. I think that no Venezuelan, President Maduro, the Bolivarian Revolution, are not insane to pursue that path, because that would be serving up the Bolivarian Revolution on a silver platter to imperialism, because that is what they will want. So they've not been able to overthrow the Bolivarian Revolution through sanctions and right-wing, instigating fascist groups and extreme right-wing groups to overthrow their Bolivarian Revolution. So after they've not been able to succeed with that so far, why would you attempt to invade Guyana, right? And that's what they will be looking for. So we know that's nonsense. Good. So I think that what we need to do, that any government that is really, that put Guyana first and not the interests of foreign powers, to sit down with Venezuela. We must be able to talk to Venezuela without any external power telling us what to do and what not to do, because they do not have our interests at heart. It's not about Guyana. And I don't know if they will return to that. I think that there are powerful forces that are pushing them. And the government, our government, whether the ones who were in office before, as well as those who are in, and those, if the PPP is out of office, those who are coming in would be the same.
Got it.
But I think I want to make this clear. I do not buy into the fallacious narrative, the imperial narrative that Venezuela and President Maduro wants to invade Guyana. I do not believe that. And I think the people who really want to do the invasion, in fact, I'm not surprised if we are not already invaded. They want to invade Guyana, Venezuela, from Guyana, and maybe from Trinidad too. That is their
That's
agenda.
right.
But I would like, of course, I think that the way forward is because seasoned diplomats, progressive diplomats in the Caribbean have said that the way forward is that the 66 Geneva Agreement is always there for you to go back to have discussions on, to talk, to have dialogue as neighbors, to sit down and talk to. Because both of us, both countries have been the victims of colonial genocide, enslavement. Simon Bolivar, the great liberator, fought a war of independence. We had our own national heroes here, Kofi and so, fighting against the Dutch. You were fighting against the Spanish. And you know, all the great freedom fighters of this region, we in their tradition have to pursue the noble part, whether we follow Kofi or Bossa in Barbados, or the Maroons in Jamaica, Jose Marti in Cuba, Bolivar. All of these people, they fought against enslavement, they fought against colonialism and oppression. And in being true to the traditional legacy, we as their spiritual heirs and descendants should not fight among ourselves, but we have a common enemy, which is imperialism, and to fight for our true independence. And the way forward, I believe, is for the government of Guyana, whichever party forms the government, to sit down with Venezuela, return to the 66 Geneva Agreement, and have dialogue and talk, and to ignore, to stand up to those who are hell-bent on pushing our countries down a path that will only bring destruction on both countries.
I agree with you. I agree with you. Sahe, it's your turn.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to make it clear that on my behalf and our organization as anti-imperialists, we support the Cuban Revolution. We support the Bolivarian Revolution. We support the progressive governments in Bolivia, in Colombia. Yes, we support the struggle of the movement towards socialism of Evo Morales' party. We support the countries, the revolutionary Pan-Africanist and socialist governments in the Sahel. We stood with the Libyan revolution that was overthrown by pseudo Islamist heretical groups in the service of imperialism. We support the Iranian people, the Iranian revolution, and all, because this struggle that we are faced with is, we talk about multi-ideological. It is not whether you're inspired by Islam or by Marxism, Leninism, or your democratic socialist or liberation theologies. Once we are opposed to capitalism and imperialism, and we form a resistance, axis of resistance against the imperial monster. So we support the Chinese, we support the achievements of China, and China as a country that is committed to peace, respect for the sovereignty of countries irrespective of their size and wealth. And unlike some others who see that this was going on in Ukraine, some communist parties have lost their way, not all, as anti-imperialist striving. We support the Russian Federation and President Putin in the struggle against the neo-fascist regime in Ukraine. And Russia had a legitimate right to intervene into that area. Right? So that is our position. That is where we are ideologically and politically.
Definitely. I mean,
And we
imperialism is our
support, of course,
biggest
as I
enemy.
said, the Bolivarian Revolution. We know what is going on. We know that there are many neo-fascist organizations in your countries, that some of them are even part. Do you know they have about 3 to 4 neo-fascist internationals? In the same way, like how you have the Socialist International or Communist International, there is one called WUNS, World Union of National Socialists, and they have a branch in Venezuela. Good. That was founded by some early Nazis who praised Hitler and saw Hitler as an avatar, as a reincarnation of, a god and so. And you have those groups, but you have other neo-fascist right-wing groups, and they've been coordinating. They have a way of bringing together people who have had military training, and they've brought together neo-Nazis from different countries, even from Colombia, to fight in Ukraine. And some of these neo-Nazi groups are tied up, colluding with some of these heretical Islamic groups. So why I mention that is because the struggle is one struggle with different fronts. So your enemies are our enemies.
Okay, so coming back to Guyana, how do you see Guyana's future in the short term as well as in the medium term? I mean, not just about election in 2025, but beyond, maybe in the next 5 years.
I think what is going to happen in Guyana is right now we're getting ready. The elections are constitutionally due this year, 2020, around November. They might hold it before, but it's going to be the same thing that we've been having for years. We see political parties who ideologically are no different. They're no different. So they're going to mobilize their constituencies and get people to vote for them along ethnic lines, and also on, leveling the thing about who's corrupt, who's more corrupt than who. But concrete issues facing the nation will, like ExxonMobil, what ExxonMobil is doing in the country, foreign capital raping the country, the Caribbean as a zone of peace, no military bases in our country. Those things will not come up for discussion. It will be a politics of, we call it, of where it's reduced to personalities, to abuse each other and so on, to mobilize along ethnic lines. But what is going to happen is, this is a law of what the dialectics teaches. We're going to reach a point where the contradictions are becoming so glaring. It's so glaring, and then it's going to reach a point where there's going to be a social explosion. And anybody reading the movement of the times and the history of the times of what is going on in the world and what is happening in Guyana, any political organization worth its salt will be in tune with that and know when to seize the time. I think what is going to happen in Guyana is there's a lot of persons, there's a lot of people in the society who believe that the two major parties have outlived their purpose, that their period is over. And people, we get this, people are fed up with them. But, there is this thing about where our people have been, not only in Guyana, inculcated with this thing that there is a savior. Somebody is going to come on and save you. So we try what we tell people is that there's no saviors. You, human agency, you must be a conscious, self-determining agent of change. And we cannot fight independently as individuals. We have to fight collectively in organization. And that the elections are going to be selections, really, because the 2015 general elections, a former US diplomat interfered heavily. He interfered in it. And we're never going to, from now on, we are not going to have any elections and general elections in Guyana. The results will always be shaped by external forces, by what the Americans want. And the political parties here in our governments are not strong to stand up to them. You've seen what they did in Bolivia, what they're attempting in Colombia, what they do in other countries. So they're going to wring the arms of our political leaders. And we're going to see more inequality in wealth. We're going to see those who are getting wealthier, getting more powerful. And the crime, there's been the crime is increasing. When I speak about crime, not only white collar crime, but crime in the street. And what is his response to the police? It will be to shoot and kill. And we're going to go further down with neoliberal policies and control of the economy. We're a captured neo-colonial state. Things are going to get worse. It can't get better. It's going to get better for those who are already wealthy and who are powerful. And as the contradictions become so glaring, as I said, you're going to have a social implosion. And it's going to be the place will become ungovernable for those who are in office but don't really wield power. Because you can be in office, as I said earlier, and don't have power. Being in office and having power are two different things. And our politicians are in office. But power, real power, is still in the hands of those who granted us some semblance of formal independence, flag and anthem independence, and those who, when you, as I said, you studied the Monroe Doctrine, who never took our independence seriously in any way or form. Yeah.
So thanks a lot for this very insightful discussion that we have been having. So if there is anything that we have not talked about but you think is important, you can talk about it, and then we'll close this thing.
Well, as we say, we keep hope alive. I believe, and I always like to close with this, I believe that the universe is constructed on the principles of truth and justice. And in Islam, it says that God, Allah, is Adil, justice, and He's Haq, Al-Haq, the truth. I believe that when you violate those principles of which the universe is founded on, you're going to destroy yourself. I believe that those of us who fight for truth and justice, we are going to win. We may not see the victory in our lifetime, but just by what we are doing is good. It shows that we are already victorious. And that is why Jesus mentioned Hugo Chavez earlier. And when I read what he said, I paid a tribute to him in an article when he died, when he drew from the liberation theology in the Christian tradition. That is what we're talking about. And I believe that all of us, what you are doing here, you Sahil and you Jesus, what you're doing is contributed to that struggle that has been going on from the beginning of time, to fight for truth and justice. I believe that the fundamental contradiction in the world is between truth and falsehood, or between what is called the party of God. They say the party of God and the party of Shaitan, and that's how you get Hezbollah. It means the party of God. Now, to be in the party of God, you don't necessarily have to be a believer. A communist can be in the party of God. What am I talking about? Because a person can proclaim themselves, a person can say, I'm a Christian or I'm a Muslim, but then they find themselves supporting oppression, and injustice. You see, like we have you have Muslims who will vote for Trump and support Trump, or support. Many of them have taken a position. They're not fighting Israel, but they're fighting the liberation forces. An atheist, you have people who don't believe in God, but they fight against injustice. And I want to say this quickly to you. In the early years, a Cuban delegation went to Iran and they met with Ayatollah Taligani, a very deep thinker. And Taligani said to the Cuban delegation, he said, you might accept dialectical materialism, we may not accept it. But the Cuban revolution is an Islamic revolution. That is what Taligani said. The Bolivarian revolution is an Islamic revolution. Why? Because it's fighting for truth, justice, and against oppression. So it doesn't have to be an Islamic, you don't have to be an Islamic revolution, have an Islamic revolution by Muslims. You see what I'm getting at? You know, so you can be an atheist and you have done more for your fellow human beings. You've fought injustice. And then there are those of us who are so wrapped up in our personal piety of blessing ourselves, praying 5 times a day, but then we support the forces of oppression and injustice. That's a serious contradiction. So I am a believer, but I will pick and work with a communist or an atheist. I will work with any atheist than work with a so-called believer who does nothing, who's just happy to pray 5 times a day, indulge in their piety, but does not stand up to Zionism, does not stand up to imperialism.
Jesus, if you would like to close out, that will be that will be very great.
Thank you, Saheli. Gerald, it was a real pleasure to have you with us. I'm talking from my heart. It is great that we have someone from Guyana to talk to also, and it was thanks to Sahili and Kim, and I believe that that's very important for the work that we do in Orinoco Tribune.
Thank you too.
And we hope that we can, keep in contact, not only for interviews or anything. I mean, if you need something from Orinoco Tribune, you can count on
We'll definitely we'll stay in contact with you and update you on things and so too.
Absolutely. I'm going to wrap up
and
right
you
now.
You can contact me anytime for any interview with.
I'm going to wrap up
anytime.
Right now.
Always available.
Thank you again. And we will be in contact.
Yes.
I believe that we are ready.